welcome to season 3 of RFI Group's Global Digital Banker podcast. I'm Kate Wilson. I'm Research Director and Deputy GM at RFI Group.
And I'm Anna Shaw, Head of Client Insights for RFI Group.
We're the new co-hosts for the season and we're really excited to be here. We hope you've listened to some of the podcast episodes in the past. If you haven't, this podcast is really dedicated to understanding some of the key trends that are impacting banking and financial services. So that's what we've really looked at in the past. It's something that Anna and I are definitely going to continue into this season. So we're going to be talking about some of the changes that are impacting the market, in particular big global changes like the rise of buy now, pay later, like the introduction of open banking, shifts that have been happening around the world as a result of the pandemic. I'm sure we'll be talking about quite a lot this year at least as well. But the other thing that Anna and I really want to focus on and introduce to the podcast this season is the opportunity to talk about some of the bigger sort of behind the scene things that are happening in banking that maybe we don't focus on as much in our day-to-day lives, but are really important. So things like sustainability, like financial inclusion, like having diversity in banking and financial services. We're going to be welcoming a lot of podcast guests who are experts in these areas, and we're really looking forward to talking about these topics in addition to those key trends and themes impacting on banking financial services globally.
Today's episode is really just to introduce myself and Kate so you can get to know your new hosts and get a feel for why we're so passionate about research and what really excites us about financial services. So if I start us off, personally, I'm really passionate about financial inclusion, resilience and literacy, particularly when thinking about who is excluded from financial services and who could really benefit from increased financial literacy and initiatives that really help to make financial products more inclusive and more available to different groups, such as those who are from non-English speaking backgrounds, women, Indigenous communities, etc. So for me, this is something that I find is really important, but it's also something that I'm really passionate about. And I'll be really integrating that throughout the podcast through some really amazing speakers and interviews with people in this space who are doing some really fantastic work to increase financial inclusion, both in Australia, but also globally as well. And I think something to start us off is an RFI Group stat that I think really ties in nicely with the topic of financial inclusion. And this is the fact that our data actually shows that only 38% of Australians have a high level of understanding about banking and finance. So what this means is there's 60% of Australians who actually don't rate their understanding as high at all, which to me really signals an opportunity to think about how can we make Australians more comfortable and more confident in their understanding of banking, and what tools can we give them to really help them to navigate the financial services world. And
so, as Anna said, we're both really passionate about banking and also about research. We've both been at RFI for a number of years. So we both spend a lot of our time looking at data and looking at trends about what's happening in banking and financial services. And if I think about what I would really like to be talking to people about throughout this season of the podcast, it's really focusing in on how we can solve key customer problems. So a lot of our research identifies things that customers might be struggling with, like the financial literacy stat that Anna just mentioned. What I'd really like to do is talk to providers in the market who are looking to solve those problems. So I'll be talking to a lot of fintech providers who are coming into the market trying to solve old problems with new solutions. I'll be talking to incumbent providers who are launching new solutions into the market, and also the partnerships that exist between those types of providers. That's something that I'll be really focused on. And just to pick up on what Anna was mentioning there around financial literacy and what we're seeing in our own data at RFI, I think a complementary stat to the one that Anna mentioned is what we're starting to see around the uptake of financial health tools. So there's a number of financial health tools that now exist in the market in Australia. We're seeing the incumbents launch their own tools as well as the neobanks and the fintechs in the market. And we've seen relatively low take up of those tools, which is somewhat surprising given we know that customers struggle with financial health, given that we know that customers are really looking for more support around spending and savings, and how they can manage that better. But even when you look at that small group of customers who've used those tools, we also see around half of them aren't using them regularly. So maybe we're not yet there in terms of having the right solution to fit that problem. Maybe those tools don't quite do what they need to do, or maybe it's simply customers aren't aware of how to use those tools correctly. So they're the types of questions that I would really like to tackle and talk about as we go through this season of the podcast.
Both Kate and I are really excited for this season of the podcast, and I think there's going to be a number of really interesting topics that we're diving into that both of us are excited about, but also things that are really topical and really relevant to the market of financial services. So we're really looking forward to our first ever episode, and we hope to see you there.